Hi, I'm Phil Hearn, and today's podcast I'm going to be looking at how the software you use to conduct market research might make a difference to your profitability. And I guess there's a subtext in this as well. How will market research need to change post-COVID-19? So join me for this podcast. Hi, I'm Phil Hearn from MRDC Software, and today's podcast is called How MR Can Be More Profitable with the Right Software. And as I said in the intro, there's a subtext in here too, in that I'm looking at how businesses are going to respond to COVID-19, what happens afterwards. There's a lot of talk about the new normal at the moment, but what business is going to look like, let's say a year down the road or perhaps a bit more. And how is business supposed to respond? And of course, I work in the market research sector, and I'm particularly interested in how market research is going to come out of this. And is it a rosy future, or are there a lot of problems, or do we need to change in some way? Earlier this week, I joined Ray Pointer on a webinar, and I signed into the webinar, and I listened to what he had to say, and he said that a lot of companies are planning post-COVID-19 by looking at things in four different ways, because everyone accepts that there's a great uncertainty as to where we're going to go from this in business. Are things going to pick up very quickly? We can have a lot of redundancies, a lot of lost business. What is going to happen? Is the new normal going to be just returned to the old normal within maybe 6 months, a year, or what? Or is there going to be some major differences? And he split things down into two things that you need to consider. And I think these are quite sensible things to consider. The first thing is, will the outcome from COVID-19 be positive or negative? And by that, in terms of the disease itself, will we cope with the problems from it either by having a vaccination, for example, or will the number of cases just naturally fritter away so it's not a problem? Will there be and do we expect a positive outcome, or do we conversely expect a negative outcome? And then the other thing to consider is business itself. Will business just return to normal in, say, 3-4 months' time, so that it just carries on from where it was at the end of 2019, or will there be some huge negative impact that's going to change things because people aren't going to spend money on market research, or companies aren't going to spend money on market research, and there'll be a general squeeze that's going to last for some time or for the foreseeable future? And of course, you can make that then into a 2x2 matrix, and you can say, okay, well, one scenario is that there's a positive outcome. COVID ceases to be a problem to the way we live and the way we're able to work, and business picks up back where it was at the end of 2019 and early 2020. So that's one scenario. Or COVID could have a positive outcome, but business could have a really serious negative effect. Thirdly, COVID could be a problem for some time to come, but we get better at living with it in some way, and business starts to pick up. And finally, there's the sort of negative, the worst case, where COVID continues to be a problem for many months or perhaps even longer into the future, and business is very negatively impacted. And his suggestion was we ought to think about our businesses in each of those four ways. So we're sort of planning for each of those scenarios, accepting, of course, that it might not be quite as black and white as I'm painting it here. There'll be some grey areas in between. But if we think about those four cases, it might be a good way to plan our business sort of looking forward. And in some sense, this podcast is sort of tying in with that, in the sense that I think most people accept that some changes are going to take place. There's going to be some hardships. And if I look at some of the webinars and podcasts that are around at the moment, and some of the articles, well, a lot of the press articles that I read, I follow LinkedIn quite closely, a lot of stuff on there. In terms of COVID itself, they're comparing country to country, which I think is a difficult one because there's so many variations between countries. There's different profiles of each country. countries are collecting different stats. You could say there's an element of luck to how much COVID spreads, and there's different population profiles and different behaviours by each population to make comparisons very easy and to predict the outcome. So I'm not going to go down that path particularly. A lot of the webinars that I have attended and podcasts that I've seen and not really actually taken part in or visited sort of talk about we need to be upbeat and stay positive, be positive. I think that's all very well, but I think there's a reality as well that we do need to prepare for what might come ahead. And just to sort of say, well, stay positive, be positive, stick together is good in some ways, but I think also we need to be ready for perhaps some tough times that are ahead in the next couple of years, and maybe beyond that. Some people are saying that this is going to have an effect for many years to come, and I see no coherent voice out there, to be honest. No, the commentators and the so-called experts out there are not really giving one view of what it's going to be like in 6 months, a year's time and 2 years' time. There's no real agreement on that, and I think, to be honest, nobody really knows. So preparation for what might be ahead, I think, is is wise. And MR, I think, is no different. Market research, I think, probably does need to think about changing. I think it's already in the throes of doing making some changes, but maybe they need to speed up a little bit now. And one of the things I think that can rescue any business in bad times, or perhaps or in good times can make them even stronger, is the advance of technology. And perhaps that's the whole thrust of this podcast, really, in that I think there's an opportunity for market research now to grab the technology that's emerging and to really use it, try it, make it better by using it. And you might say I'm saying that because I run a software company, and you might interpret that as saying just buy my software, and that's really the purpose of this podcast. Well, there's an element of truth to that. Yes, I do want you to buy our software. There's no lie there. But I actually want the market research industry to look at itself and look at how it can change and deliver a better product. Because if it delivers a better product, it's got more chance of being successful in the future. And I see technology being a really good opportunity for market research to push forward and actually perhaps gain some of the ground that it might have lost to some of the industries that sit around the periphery of market research, nibbling away at what you might call market research business. So that's my sort of area that I want to cover in this podcast. And there's no doubt in my mind that this pandemic is going to affect different companies in different ways. And it's not going to be a case of necessarily the worst or the weakest companies either struggling badly or perhaps being put out of business. There's an element of which sector do you do your research in. If you happen to be in a sector that's been more severely hit by COVID, that's obviously going to damage you more than perhaps some sectors which have kept going very well. Retail, for example, and supermarket chains have been kept very busy during this period, and if that's the area you're doing your research in, there's no reason to see much downturn there at all in business. But of course, if you're in the travel sector, you're doing research in the travel sector, that's been severely hit. Travel, leisure has pretty much ground to a halt around the world. So it's going to have a different impact. And so there's going to be some unlucky companies out there who are not necessarily the weakest companies getting picked off, which happens perhaps often in a recession. It's going to be perhaps where your business is. And I'd add to that there's probably going to be some research agencies out there that have buyers with quite big research programs that they depend on for their business, where those big research programs will just get cancelled, postponed or cut completely as they try to recover from the effects of COVID-19. Now that will tend to be in the sectors most affected, but there'll be some cautious companies out there, I think, that will just decide not to spend quite as much money on market research in 2020, 2021 as they might have done had life continued as normal through 2020. So There's going to be some big losers, and I think what we can do as an industry to be best prepared now for what is in front. There's things we can't do about, but there's some things we can do about, and that's really perhaps what I'm trying to rally a call for here, is let's look at technology and see if we can deliver something that's better, so that more business that perhaps seeps out of the market research industry is brought back in, and we can offer a product that's quite attractive to buyers of research, to tempt them to part with their money as well. So where does it start, this idea? What things would I look at? Well, I've already said that technology is an important part of that whole process, and I think companies investing in technology will tend to be the winners here, because they can both cut their costs and offer more if they embrace technology. Yes, they can make some mistakes doing that, but if they don't do it, I think they're going to just get overtaken by the companies that take up opportunities. Of course, if there's a rethink in market research, one thing that doesn't need to be rethought is the quality of what we're doing. Good research still is important. We can't suddenly start to churn out a cheap product, because that will just have a negative effect on the industry and will lose us business in the long run. So cutting quality, I don't think is an option. But what we can do is to push for the cheapest way and the most efficient way, and arguably the fastest way, not arguably, but actually importantly, the fastest way of conducting research. So we look a bit more modern and up to date, and keeping in line with other processes that buyers of research have in place. And I think there, online research really has to be the future. And I think, there's a greater acceptance of online now as being a way of doing research. Some of the barriers when online first come into the market research arena were that, I think the arguments were anybody over 50 won't want to fill in a questionnaire online. Well, that age group has moved up, of course, over the years, the longer that online research has been around. But I think it's been pushed forward now through COVID, in the sense that people have got more comfortable online as a result of COVID. You know, whether this is mainly for social reasons, I guess, but it's also for practical reasons. People have got used to perhaps talking to their grandchildren on Zoom or whatever it might be. So people in their 60s and 70s have got much more used to using technology to communicate, and that, I think, is a good thing for market research. It means it opening up a channel that's more acceptable to more people in an age range where that has been cited as a barrier in the past. And people have got very used to doing things online, ordering things online, buying from Amazon, things like that. Those sorts of communications and those sorts of familiarity can only help us as an industry, and make people more willing, shall I say, to complete questionnaires online, because it's just another piece of communication. So I think there's an opportunity there, and I know we do a lot of work in Asia Pacific. A high percentage of our software users are based in Asia Pacific, because that's an area where we have an office and have a very large customer base. And one thing that I learnt recently, in a podcast that I staged with Yanti Nisro, that there needs to be change there. Now, Yanti is a past president of PERPI, which is the Indonesian Market Research Association. She's currently the SMR rep for Indonesia. And in countries like Indonesia and other countries, face-to-face field work is still around 50%. If it's not far off 50, it's certainly very close to 50. In some places, it's in excess of 50. And she firmly believes that needs to change, that that percentage needs to come down. It needs to go online. That means a change to perhaps the length of surveys, rather than hour-long questionnaires that were conducted face-to-face. That needs to change, and there's a real call within PERPI to change the way they work. And you might say that perhaps just that has inspired this podcast today to some extent, because I listened to something that they ran online recently, and it was very much the focus was getting things online. So moving to online really is, I think, an important step, and I can see that as something that's growing, certainly in the countries where face-to-face is still a very high percentage of the business. But I think it needs to go farther than that. I think that for too long in market research, we've been delivering stuff as PowerPoint presentations, delivering the presentations on using PowerPoint, sending reports in PowerPoint format. PowerPoint has its strengths, I don't deny it, and it's a good piece of software for communicating certain information, but it's static. It's not a modern way to deliver things. I think there really needs to be a push to deliver data on online dashboards, because that is the way that most people now receive and use their data online, not necessarily in dashboards, but online. And I think this is one of the things that market research needs to address. Now, dashboards are going through a change. They used to be incredibly expensive to get custom built not that long ago. There were some very expensive players that are still in the market that perhaps have had an easy 2 or 3 years selling online dashboards for fairly high sums of figures, but that's priced out the average market research company. Maybe the biggest companies can afford that, but certainly most small companies could not afford to buy into these systems that are tens of thousands of dollars to use per year. That's changing, and I'll make an admission here that it's one thing that I've been desperately keen that MRDC pushes into. So if I am going to do a sales pitch, and this is not really a sales pitch today, that's something we've really pushed into. We've linked all our software to the CYS platform, for example, because that's a platform that can collect data, push it into a dashboard automatically, and deliver stuff online so that buyers of research can view their data on their desktop or on their mobile phone while they're on the go and drill down into that data. Now, I think that's an important development, but that's got to become accessible to everybody in the industry. Therefore, it's got to be priced at the right price. We feel we've made a very competitive offer to people on that, but it's not really about that. I want to see the whole industry go that way and actually have more products come into the market that makes it more competitive, improves the software, and actually makes it the norm that in market research we deliver our stuff online, because if we don't, somebody else will. And to date, delivering data in online dashboards has been a really expensive tool to have to buy. It's been outside the budget of a small to medium research project. So it's something I think needs to change. And I discussed this with Yanti, and that's certainly something that, was felt is something that's got to be moving in the right direction, that we've got to start delivering our data online, because that's what people expect. They want to receive it and use it on their phones when it suits them, and so on. So there's sort of a couple of things where I think there's some change needed. Beyond that, on dashboards, I think that dashboards make a good opportunity to plug other data sources into market research reporting. Too often I see market research data presented in isolation, and I think it's important that we present it alongside other data. Now, that might be other market research surveys, so I rarely see data from two surveys presented side by side, and rarely see other business data included in those, certainly to any depth, maybe to a very high level, like the overall sales for the year were, or something like that, but not to a depth. And it's more and more possible these days to plug data sources together in the right platforms so that you can put market research data alongside sales data, advertising spend, maybe some targets, some KPIs, and so on. Stuff that is totally relevant to the buyers of research that they would love to have at their fingertips so they can see effects of whatever you're researching alongside other business data. And I think this is something that really ought to become the norm, actually. We talk about the new normal, but let's talk about the norm in market research. I think that should be something that market research agencies should be able to deliver and do it at almost no cost or very low cost. So there's another thing, keeping all data together so that we can deliver a better product, I think really is important and something that I think is essential. And I want market research as well to look at improving the way we present and deliver and handle tracking studies. Tracking studies have always been very profitable businesses, particularly for some of the larger companies out there, but for many companies. And they've tended to be priced as, okay, we'll do year one at this price and year two or quarter two, whatever it is, at a slightly lower price. But the scope is there now to do something that's far more automated, so that maybe you're collecting data continuously, feeding into a data stream that automatically updates in real time on a dashboard, for example. That sort of technology now is there in the marketplace, and it's become competitively priced. And again, I'm certainly going to mention that what we have to offer there really pushes us into that zone now where we can pull data together. And it's been a long ambition of mine to have that in place. And it's something that's, I think, an achievement for us in 2020. So perhaps looking at tracking studies, not necessarily as the big trackers that are run annually or quarterly, but perhaps looking at doing some small tracking studies that just collect small amounts of information, small surveys, but they're perhaps carried out continuously with a constant data flow that can be rolled out to the clients and deliver data at their fingertips, updated, maybe in real time, maybe weekly, maybe monthly, depending on how often it is important to update that data. But I really want to see that as something that comes to be the norm. Now, I'm aware I haven't really addressed the subject of this webinar. I've been going for 20 minutes here now, and I haven't really addressed that subject of how MR can be more profitable with the right software. And I think it's time to pull this together now. Having talked about how the industry might need to change, let's come up with 3 things to look for in software that can make a real difference to your profitability. So the first thing I'm going to say here is that I think you need software that can collect and deliver online. That doesn't need to be the same piece of software. It can be different products, and I'll come to that as a second point in a minute. But it's important that you have good software that can collect and deliver online. It needs to be good enough to do what you want to do and what your customers want to do and where you're pitching yourself. And that's a difficult market because there's a whole range of software out there, from the free or almost free bits of software that you could buy just by Googling or use at quite low rates, but they might be very limited in what they can collect and what they deliver. But if that's good enough for you, I have no problem with anybody using software that's good enough for them. But you might need to look a little bit further up the scale to platforms that can handle the level perhaps routing on a questionnaire that you want, card sorts in data collection, and the level of reporting that you want to be able to do in reporting data or providing online dashboards. And of course, there's some very high-end products, and I would actually question those sometimes. Sometimes they're very complex to use and maybe beyond what you need, and you really don't need to spend that sort of money to get what you want. The second thing I would look for, and it is connected, is you need to have software, I think, that is connected, that can be versatile. And what I might mean by that is that having collected your data, you can move it to another product easily. And I've seen people in data processing spend hours at times converting data so that it can go into another product, so that it can be reported in a certain way or analyzed in a certain way. That process needs to be a button process, so that you could transfer your software to a specialist product, perhaps using something like SSS, which is a very good way of transferring data between products. But you can transfer data from one product to another very smoothly, or perhaps through Excel, to achieve what you want to do. And it's got to be easy. If it's not easy, you're going to start having costs to transfer that data into the format that you want. And secondly, people will start making errors and it won't be an automatic process and it defeats the whole object. And by that, I mean you can transfer it so that you can put it into online reporting systems, online dashboards, or it might be putting it so that you can generate automated PowerPoint presentations if that is the most appropriate thing for your particular client. So I think using software that you can easily transfer data is important because it gives you that flexibility. I'm not keen on software that really traps you in. We've made sure that all of our software connects to as many different things as possible so that you've got the flexibility there to do what you want to do. And the third thing I'm going to say is I think it's important to use software that can pull other data alongside your survey data so that when you report it, you're giving your clients a little bit more than just the results of the survey that you have been commissioned to carry out. So you can pull in other data. You can pull in survey data from another survey, or perhaps you can pull in customer experience data that your client has collected, sales data perhaps that they've got, anything that makes the market research data more powerful, if you like, and giving people more and giving them what they want to see in one place. It also then promotes you as a company and gets you a little bit closer to the boardroom if you can get more data beyond your survey data in the same place for your clients. So they're my three tips to look for, and I think they can really make a difference. And without spending a lot of money on software, you can become more profitable. So I think market research has got some really good places where it can go with technology. There's some other things that are happening. Social listening and social media analytics are something that are improving all the time and becoming more cost effective to do and do to a high standard. So that's something else that we feel is important. And online communities are a very good way to get feedback from customers and so on, brand loyalists and so on. So these are really sort of things where technology can really help a business inexpensively conduct research and compete. And I really want to see the product stay high in quality and fresh because I think the opportunity is there to do that. And I think good research is something that's important. So I'm looking for some change. I'm looking to see market research to come together, explore these tools, critique them, say what's not good about them to make them better, and push the software industry, if you like. If I'm asking for anything, it's perhaps to push us into producing better software that means you can deliver a better product more cost effectively. Because one thing that's going to come out of this, I think anyway, is that there's going to be more pressure on market research agencies to be productive, and so their productivity needs to go up and to deliver better product. And I think they're the two things that we should be seeking from all of our research that we're doing and for the way that we're trying to push our businesses, because I'm sure there's opportunities for market research businesses to grow and improve once we get out of this pandemic, and I think technology can do it, but the focus has to be on productivity, doing the sorts of surveys that we can do well, selling them at the right price, using technology to deliver them quickly, efficiently, and at a sensible price, but with the information that buyers of research really need. Well, I'd welcome feedback on this podcast. Anybody who wants to come back and challenge what I've said or agree or add to what I've said, I'll really welcome it. I'd certainly like to hear from anybody, and I'd quite like to do a follow-up podcast with anybody who wants to discuss this with me further. So thank you for listening to me. I hope it's been interesting to you. Please send anything to me. My email address is phil.hearn, Hearn, @mrdcsoftware.com. Thanks for joining me today.